Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cleveland Photographic Society pre-recorded presentation for August 28th, 2020. Tonight's speakers, we're going to first have Mike Kopkas, our president, who's going to make some announcements. And then our presenter is going to be Richard Ader, who's going to be presenting the Candid Photography of People. And if you'd like to view this presentation again, visit the CPS YouTube channel. The link is available on the CPS homepage, or you can simply visit YouTube and search for Cleve Photographic. I'd like to now present our president, Mike Kopkas. Take it away, Mike.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's presentation. I'm glad you could be here. I do have a few announcements to make. We do have some competitions coming up in the month of September. The first one is September 4th. It's a black and white and pictorial competition. The deadline for entry to that competition has passed already, but please feel free to join us and take a look at the pictures and hear the judges' comments. The next competition is September 18th. That's the B competition. The deadline for that is September 9th. And then the final competition for September is September 25th, and that's a nature and pictorial competition, and the deadline is September 16th. We do have a couple of field trips that have been canceled, so we want to make sure you're aware of that. The Cleveland Air Show has been canceled. That was scheduled from September 5th through September 7th. And the Back to the Wild field trip that was scheduled for September 20th, unfortunately, has also been canceled. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Richard Ader. Richard's going to be talking about candid photography of people. Richard?
Thanks, Mike. My name is Richard Ader, and I've been a member of Cleveland Photographic Society now for about 3 years. And tonight I'm going to be talking about street photography, which is my special passion, candids of people. I've been doing this for several decades, and what really attracts me to this is I used to be in photojournalism, and this is very similar. It's a challenge. Each candid you take is something that can't be recreated. It exists only in the moment. You can't go back the next day and retake it. So when everything comes together, it really just gives a lot of satisfaction. So without further ado, let's get into the goals of the presentation. What I'd like to do during this talk is to have you learn the techniques to become a good street photographer. Also to learn how to think like a street photographer. Street photography is something unlike other aspects of photography where aside from the technical aspects, there is a certain amount of mindset that you have to have in order to get the capture. And lastly, to have fun taking candids and doing street photography. It is a challenge. We're going to be covering definition, differences between landscapes and candids, types of candids, techniques of shooting candids, equipment and gear, approach to camera settings, focus, 5 scenarios you'll always come across when taking a candid, my plea to learn some photo editing, special circumstances, potential photo opportunities, and of course, safety. Let's get started now. Definition is, the definition really doesn't mean anything because this is art. And so whatever produces a pleasing image, anything goes. But to have a loose definition of street photography, it is usually a spontaneous, non-posed photo. Once you ask someone, can I take your picture, they usually pose and it's no longer candid. Natural light, no flash, no studio lights or reflectors. But again, there are street photographers that use reflectors and produce absolutely stunning images. And this is a branch of street photography, and it's street portraits. So again, a very, very valid part of street photography, but usually we work without artificial light. It is not studio photography, it is not model photography, and it's not environmental portraiture, which is basically taking a model out to an area and using natural light in a different setting. But again, these are all soft rules because whatever works, whatever makes a pleasing image is fine. And I tend to think of this as photojournalism of people. Now, to show you the differences between candids or street photography and some other types of photography, I chose landscapes. Now, in other types of photography, you have control of the subject. And I guarantee you, if you come back the next day, those two trees will be there, as well as the mountain. You have complete control of this. In candids, in street photography, you have no control of the subject. In this case, a young boy in a doorway, I thought was a very pleasing image. When I do street photography, I usually try to burst 3 images in a row in order to make sure the eyes are open or I get the expression. This is picture 1 of 3. Picture 2 is just the door itself. The person is gone. I mean, you have no control over that. You've got to be fast and ready. Lighting. You have control of lighting in landscape photography. If you don't like the way that light looks, you want the golden hour, you come back then, you come back the next day when there are clouds. In street photography, you have no control over the lighting. Now here's a case where I was particularly attracted to this young woman. I liked the character of her face, the way she was dressed, but she was standing off to the left there where that room was completely dark. There was a window to the right, but she was not by it. So I sat in a chair for about 15 minutes in order to just hope she would walk over there, and she eventually did. I was able to get the capture, but you usually have no control over that. She either walks to the window or she doesn't. You have no control. This is a guide in one of the slot canyons in Arizona, and if you've ever been in a slot canyon, they could be very dark and narrow. He just happened to be standing there with perfect lighting. Now, if he was, as he was a few minutes earlier, 20 yards to his left, he'd be out of the canyon and out in the Arizona midday sun, which was terrible lighting. And a few minutes after this, he was 20 yards to his right, which was inside the slot canyon where there was hardly any light whatsoever. You can't position him. You just happen to be lucky here. Again, a lot of things have to come together sometimes in street photography to get a good candid, but you have no control over the lighting. Control of the lenses. In landscapes, if you want to use a normal lens and get that image fine, if you want to use a wide angle lens and bring some of the foreground in focus, as well as the background, you can. You just change your lens. With candids of people in street photography, occasionally you have no choice of lenses. And this was a case where I had my 70-200 on, and I was taking a picture or getting set to some kids down the street, where all of a sudden these Secret Service type people came, leading a procession of dignitaries. This was in Cairo. An ideal setting, I was inches from them, but unfortunately have a 70-200. There's no time to change. There's nothing you could do other than what's counterintuitive for all photographers is to get this shot, I had to actually back up about 20 yards away in order to use the lens. Now, different types of candids, they will be pleasing. A candid could exist just as a pleasing image, but some of them have the additional benefit of telling a story. And in telling a story is when an image is not only pleasing, but it evokes that question of, what's going on here? Or I wish I knew a little bit more about what the story was. And here's an interesting man caked in mud, walking in the water, an interesting candid. What's the story? It's a natural question to ask. This was at the Dead Sea. That mud is extremely expensive when you buy it at the mall here in Cleveland. There, you just reach your hand down and slather yourself up. It is free. This also demonstrates another thing about street photography, is when other people look at the images, you have to look at it and appreciate it as its own form of art, because people used to looking at studio work will look and say, you know, it would be nice if we could get that umbrella moved a little or if that railing wasn't there. In street photography, you have no control of your background. And sometimes it makes it so that the picture doesn't work. But otherwise, you know, you get what you can. You have no control over that. Here again, if these four kids in a little string quartet, if this had been on a stage, then it would just be an ordinary picture. You wouldn't give it a second thought. But here, it just evokes the question of why are they in the middle of an overgrown field? So again, an image, a street photograph, a candid that tells a story. They happen to be in Mongolia, in a tiny little village in the middle of the Gobi Desert, and they were doing a performance at their town square, and that is what the town square looks like. And then another candid that, of course, evokes the question of what's going on here. This image also shows you could never get enough smoke. But it shows something different. And for a lot of these images, I don't want to show them just as nice images, but I want them all to demonstrate something about street photography. And in this case, we tend to sometimes settle on the technical nature of street photography or the technical nature of a photograph. And we look at dynamic range and focus. And when you think of some of the really, really iconic images, Iwo Jima, the young girl who was napalmed in Vietnam, we look at those images, which are candid images, and we don't say, gee, this is a nice dynamic range, or the sharpness was good. It's the subject matter. So again, it doesn't always have to be technically perfect, but the subject matter could make it a stunning image. Again, telling a story. Who are these men? Why are they dressed like that? So aside from being just a pleasing street photograph or candid, it just evokes that question. And these happen to be Mongolian wrestlers in that same field. They wrestle, and this is in a tiny town. The only rules are first knee to touch the ground, you lose. And they do this all over the country until they get a national champion. Other types of candids have impact. And impact is that factor that when the image first comes on the screen, you just say, wow. Here, it just kind of is an in-your-face image. It just comes out. This is not a COVID-19 picture. This has nothing to do with our virus. This is in a highly polluted city where the motorcyclists, again, just really bundle up. But this was in extremis, again, so I thought it was a very interesting image. And again, it's just an in-your-face image. Anytime you have someone who's in your face with 3 eyes and 5 skulls and a sharp knife and vibrant colors, that also tends to be one of those wow images. Again, it doesn't have to be exciting. The girl, a knife in her hands, bright colors, staring right into the camera. Nothing else really in the picture is again, an indication of that wow factor that you could get. Candids and street photography could also just be a pleasing image, not necessarily tell a story or have the wow factor. I was attracted by just the palette of the colors, the bright yellows and reds. And it shows also that a street photograph doesn't necessarily have to be just a head and shoulder shot. This is a shot that just encompasses a number of things and is just a pleasing image. This image, again, pleasing for the overall color palette, the muted blues, the texture of the door, the texture of the rocks in the street. Again, a pleasing image. And no rule that it has to be a headshot. A street photograph or candid of a person could just be something like hands. And this is, again, natural light through a window, a man doing some calligraphy. One of the most important slides is going to be this one. When we talked before about having to think like a street photographer, it's a certain mindset, and if you're going to get the picture, they don't come to you. You sometimes have to go to it or anticipate it. Anticipate, anticipate, anticipate. Predict possible shots, plan ahead, and explore. And the next few pictures, each one is going to demonstrate one of these aspects. Now here, I thought a pleasing shot, again, one of the motorcycle riders. A way to get this shot of the motorcyclist is to use a medium telephoto and stand on the sidewalk as they go by, and that's perfectly acceptable. But in this case, there were many, many motorcycles, and one of the things I did is went up to the traffic light and positioned myself with a medium telephoto at the traffic light. Therefore, every time the light turned red, there'd be 50 motorcyclists that would be stopped, look straight ahead, and it was like doing studio work. You would just kind of select the ones you want. Any one that was interesting, that was fine. And then in a minute, the light would turn green, they'd disappear. 2 minutes later, 50 more would come and position themselves. Again, so you have maximized your chance of getting pleasing images by just a little planning ahead. A young monk and his teacher. This indicates, again, or is an example of explore. When I travel overseas, I usually go in a group. There are quite a few photographers there. We're usually following a guide, and this time they were all inside the temple. And I'm not a temple or museum person. I'd rather be taking pictures of people, and I like better light. So while everyone was in the temple, I just broke from the group and was exploring around, and there was a large courtyard, and at the end were these two all alone. I really liked the capture, but again, no one else in the group had the opportunity to even see this. It shows that, again, sometimes you have to just be always looking around, exploring, breaking from the group, and looking for the shots. They don't come to you. Now, this shot is an example, again, of planning. This was at the Burton Tractor Festival. There were a ton of tractors and interesting people on top of the tractors all over the place. Looking at the program, at 1 o'clock, they were going to do a parade around the circle of the town square at Burton. Well, to do that, they all had to get on their tractors and go out one gate to get out there, which means they were all going to be lined up. Now, way ahead of time, you could go there, position yourself, find where the light is going to be the best, what lens would work best for you, make a note of it, and then about 20 minutes before the event starts, go back and plant yourself in that situation. And when you're there then, these people are basically filing past you, going slowly, waiting to get out the gate, and you have an ideal setup because you've planned it out ahead of time. So some of these are not fortuitous. There's an interesting shot, lift and take it. With a little bit of planning at some of these, you could actually maximize your chances of getting things like the light and the subject well. This is a case of explore again. This was a festival out in a courtyard of a temple. There were a lot of interesting dancers, and everyone was taking pictures, as was I. But I again broke from the group, went around in a little room. There were I found these two monks, and they were keeping the beat for the rest of them. Again, very challenging. The light was low, but I just liked the way this looked. I've been told on this I should have moved back a little or moved to the left to get certain things again. But as a street photographer, you're used to this because there is no back. My back is up against the wall. There is no left. That is the wall. You have what you have, and that's it. You make the best of it. Anticipate. When you're a street photographer, every doorway is a potential picture of someone darting out. And this was a case, again, if kid just stuck his head out. If you have to take your lens cap off, you're going to miss the picture. If you have to figure out your settings, you're going to miss the picture. Again, you know where I'm going with this. The burst mode, 3 pictures. This is 1 of 3, 2 of 3. The kid is gone. They're like bugs. They're fast, and you have to be ready. So anticipate. Planning. This is at the Candid reenactment. And at the reenactment again, like the Burton Tractor Festival, look at the program. If there's going to be a reenactment of a particular battle at 3 o'clock, well, go ahead, several hours earlier, go over and scope it out. Where would be a good position? Where am I most likely to get the best action shots? So where's the light going to be good? And then again, just go back about 20 minutes before the event starts, and you're all set. There is a lot of waiting in street photography, but again, that is what you need to do sometimes in order to capture the picture. And this last one here is an example of, again, exploring and planning. People were in the museum then. I broke. This was around Giza at the pyramids. A very common mode of street transportation there are the horse and buggy. And I thought there might be just some interesting people in them. Most of the buggies just had no one in it or uninteresting people. But you go out to the road, you get on the side of the road where the sun is best, pick your lens, and wait. And there's a lot of waiting in street photography. And I was out there about 45 minutes and just waiting, and eventually one came by with a family in it that I thought just looked right. And by that time, you're already set. You're in position, and you're able then to get the shot. Sometimes nothing will come by. At times, it's okay to photograph the back of the subject, whatever you find to be artistic. Here, this young boy on a camel. I have several shots of him coming towards me as well as going away, and I find that the ones going away were just the most pleasing. There's no rule that this has to be a face shot. Also, in the tell the story range, the fact that he was going away shows the jersey. He's in the middle of the desert, yet he has a brand new Dwayne Wade #3 Miami Heat jersey, and that has raised always a lot of questions in terms of where did that come from? A Bedouin at the well in the Sahara Desert. There are pictures of her looking towards me, but of all the pictures I have, the one that I thought worked the best was with her back. This one is self-explanatory, a young boy on a hot summer day, just anticipating what's in that ice cream cooler, again, from the back. A woman walking down a narrow street away from the back. A soldier praying at the Western Wall before going on deployment from the back. So it does not necessarily have to be a headshot or a front shot. If it's pleasing to shoot from the back at times and that works for you, that's fine. Angles are the key thing. Try unusual angles, especially with kids. We tend to forget that we are taller than kids, and we are also lazy, which is why most pictures of kids are looking down at them, which is it makes not for a pleasing picture. Your knees, down on the knee. Here I'm on my knee, so I'm at the level of the child, and I think that works a lot better. This picture also demonstrates a matter of background. This would have been pleasing, I think, even if there hadn't been a background to it, but if you can get a background in that shows context, like the village here, that also helps in any street photograph. Again, down on a knee here to get this shot. Always with kids, you should at least get down on a knee to be at their level. Not necessarily looking down or looking up, but here, as I'm up in a temple, look over the side. And here you look down, and the monks there just happen to present a unique view because you don't usually see them from looking from above. Motorcycles on the street, the standard way we show that is shoot from the sidewalk, and that could make for a good shot. But here, wait for the light to get red, and I have to emphasize, wait for it to get red. Get in there, and as you're going across, get a shot that way, and it gives you that angle. Always think angles. What angle is going to make this a more unusual shot? Because we've all seen 1,000 shots from the sidewalk. This monk, I happen to like the way his eyes were, his expression. I had a shot from his level. It didn't work. I got down on my knee. That didn't work. This was actually me laying on the ground and taking the picture. As a street photographer, you will get used to being asked if you need medical assistance fairly often, which makes sense. You have a man laying on the ground in the midday sun again, but whatever it takes to get the shot, and here it was the angle that made the shot. Photograph from below or at the waist. There are people who do street photography that have articulated viewfinders and are able to hold their camera down at their side and take pictures looking down. The person never knows you're getting a picture taken. I did not have that particular thing, but I gave it a try once just with a wider angle lens, walking along, just holding the camera down, snapping, depending on the autofocus. And you never know. It could work. Stealth sometimes has to be used. If there is a time where you felt that it might be a little difficult taking a picture, use your telephoto lens. And this was from behind a tree off to the side, just waiting as people came down the block, and you're able to get it without even being noticed. Sometimes you have to use a little subterfuge. With kids, whenever you raise a camera, they are going to pose or look at you or something like that. These kids, this was at a street fair, and I waited till the juggler came by, and he was juggling fire sticks. And as he was juggling the fire sticks in front of the kids, I moved to the side and got them as they watched him. So you always have to really be thinking on your feet in street photography to get the image. Focus on the eyes, highly critical. When we look at a portrait, we tend to look at the eyes. If the eyes are not in focus, the portrait is really ruined. The eyes here are tack sharp, but I show this photograph to show you that the nose is out of focus and the ears are out of focus. The depth of field when you're shooting either close like this or using a telephoto lens can be very narrow. Here it's on the matter of probably an inch or less either way. Important to know because focus is critical, and if your autofocus focuses on the nose, the hairline, or the ear, here the eyes will be out of focus and the picture won't work. If the person is at an angle, use the eye or focus on the eye that's closest to you. Distance to subject. This is a hard one to teach, and it's kind of my personal space concept. We go back to the monks here, the monk and his teacher, and remember I told you that this was a big courtyard. Well, there was a big courtyard, and I was at the far end, and I was walking up towards them. I could have walked as close as I wanted right up to them, but you all understand that at a certain point, you're going to go from unobtrusive to intrusive. You'll be in their space, they will look at you, it'll ruin the picture, but where that line is just you have to feel out for yourself. I tend to stay a medium distance and use a medium telephoto. Same situation here, afternoon prayers, the police lay down their guns, they pray with the elders. I could have gotten as close as I want. I elected to stay a mild distance away with a medium telephoto. So I wasn't shooting from across the way with a large telephoto, but you sometimes, as you get closer, you'll sense when you've gotten close enough. But something important to keep in mind in street photography. And my most important slide, to protect those around you, work with what you have and stop complaining. I wish I could have been closer when I shot this guy. I wish I didn't have to use a 200 millimeter, and I wish there was more light than the 40-watt bulb way above on the ceiling, and I wish I didn't have to shoot at an ISO of 8,000. You know what? That's tough. Don't take the picture. Either take the picture, that's the challenge of it, and that's what makes it fun, but you have no control over these things, so stop whining. Equipment and gear. Now, I find, and this is a personal preference, this is not a rule, that the usual range is 24 to 200 millimeters. 24 because sometimes your back will be up against the wall, as is in this market on the left, and you want to get the whole image in, and you'll need a little bit of a wide-angle lens. These two monks on the right were 2 stories up, so you'll need a little bit of reach. The reason I say 200 millimeters is because 300 now is harder to hold, harder to handhold. It's also larger, harder to carry. And if you're getting up where the subject is that far away that you need a 300 millimeter lens, then maybe you should either be trying to get closer or not get the picture. Usually no tripod is used in street photography. Beanbag, my most important piece of equipment. A beanbag is a bag of beans. And these are photographic beanbags that are about $10. You see it there laid out on the left and over there. The key is, at almost all times, there will be something like a railing, rocks, some type of thing to rest the camera on. But if you rest it on a metal railing, you can either damage your lens, but it also doesn't give you any support. It just kind of moves around. But you see on the right, when you fold the beanbag over, and suppose that was a metal railing, and you lay the camera in, it just nestles around the lens there too and gives you tremendous support, almost as if you were working with a tripod. A choice between all of it versus minimal. This is a personal choice. I'm an all of it kind of person, is I want to have all of my equipment all the time. The problem is you just have to carry it all, which is fine. That's a choice. Others take just what they need. They could be more mobile. Personal choice. No flash. And consider a backpack type of camera bag if you're an all-of-it type person and don't have one already. For many years, I used a regular camera bag. As you get older, it gets harder on your shoulder and your neck. When I switched a few years ago to a backpack, that same 20 to 30 pounds is now actually quite easy to carry. Now, approach to camera settings. I'll go through this section and the next section carefully, but this is kind of the meat of it, and you could go back and look at these slides again if you have to. With street photography, the reason that's different from other genres of photography is you have to be fast at times. When that image just pops up, you have to be ready to go. I particularly, again, this is my preference, I use shutter speed as the most important. To me, it's the most important setting with Candids, usually 1/60th to 1/500th, so that I could hand hold and also I don't get any motion blur. The ISO, I'll use a high enough ISO so that the aperture is okay at that speed. Now, what that means is if it's a bright, sunny day, I won't have it at an ISO of 100. I'll have it at 2 or 250. The reason for that is all of a sudden, if a subject goes into the shadows or all of a sudden I'm in a shady area, that 250, I still have enough of a cushion in order to get a good shot at one of those shutter speeds. And aperture to me is not that critical with Candids. The depth of field is usually satisfactory. You usually have a smaller depth of field when you're closer, and you don't have the really time if you have a particular way you'd like this image in terms of depth of field. Sometimes, again, you just don't have that time. So to summarize this, what I do is I use shutter priority around a 1/60th, let's say, ISO of 200, and then what I'll do is I will just walk around, and if all of a sudden I walk into a darkened market, I will just flip my ISO up to 800 or 1,000, and I'll just keep shooting in shutter priority. When I come back outside, I'll flip it down to 2 or 250. Now, I'm going to add one thing. If you don't want to deal with settings at all, you have a setting on your camera called Auto ISO. And all that is you set your camera to shutter priority, so shutter priority will always be first, 1/160th. ISO to 200. Now the camera will then automatically vary your aperture, and that's what it does. If there's not enough light, it opens up your aperture wider. If you get into a darkened area and ISO 200 is not enough, after it opens up your lens as far as it goes to f2.8, let's say, it will now automatically bump your ISO up to 4, 800, 1,000, whatever needed, automatically. When you step back out again into the street where it's light, it'll bring your ISO back again to 200 where you want it. So it works with shutter priority. It'll work to automatically adjust your ISO if there's not enough light with the maximum aperture. So either one of those two ways. If you don't want to use Auto ISO, you could use the method above with just automatically just going down and changing your ISO yourself when you get into a shady situation or a situation with shade. Focus. Highly important with street photography. Things happen fast. Single servo autofocus for stationary objects. We all know how that works. The subject, we focus on the eyes, we press the shutter halfway down, and then we press it all the way down and it takes the picture. If you want to recompose, we then aim at the eyes, we press the shutter halfway down, we hold it halfway down, move the camera over to the right as we have it here, and then press the shutter all the way down. And the shutter head locked on the eyes, and you'll get this picture. Continuous servo autofocus is for moving objects. Here is a boy galloping on the horse, and rather than panning, I wanted to be in front with him coming at me. He's approaching at a very high speed. If I use single servo autofocus, I press halfway down and then press all the way down real quickly. In that split second that I went from halfway down to pressing it to take the picture, the boy has probably moved at least 4 inches or 6 inches towards me. That puts the eyes, the face, out of the plane of focus, and you won't have the perfect focus. Continuous autofocus, you move the setting to continuous, you aim at the eyes, you press the shutter halfway down, hold it, and hundreds of times a second, it will continuously change the focus. So it's always in focus, and then you just press the shutter down all the way, and your image is in focus. But what happens if you take the picture on the left, single servo autofocus, you focus on the woman's eyes, you take the picture, then all of a sudden you turn it on the right, there is a kid driving a motor scooter with his mom on the back, you got to get that shot, you switch it over to continuous autofocus, they're gone, they're down the block. And you say, well, I'm just going to keep it in continuous autofocus all the time. Why can't I do that? And the answer is you can, as long as you're not going to recompose. Now, if we use continuous focus here and just want to take this picture, we press it down halfway, it'll focus on the eyes. We press it all the way down, it'll take the picture. That's fine. But if we want to recompose like this, and we press it halfway down while focusing on his eyes, and then we keep it pressed halfway down, and we move it to the right, it'll change and focus on the wall. No good. If we go back again, press in continuous autofocus, halfway down, focus on his eyes, let it go, move the camera over to the right, and then snap the picture. Well, when you go to snap it, as soon as it gets halfway down, it'll focus on the wall. It won't work then for recomposing. So what do? There is something we could do. Back button focus. Now this is a button to be used in place of the shutter release to activate the focus. Think of it as a focus button. I had to be dragged kicking and screaming to use this several years ago. I swore it was too difficult to use and whatnot. I swear by it now. It's worth giving a try. With back button focus and continuous mode, keep it there all the time. You take this picture on the left. You aim at the eyes. With your thumb, you press the back button. It focuses on her eyes. You take your finger off there. And then just take the picture with your shutter release. Then all of a sudden, that kid comes roaring in on the motor scooter from the right. You go over. You press your thumb on the back button focus. It's in continuous focus. You keep it pressed down. It continuously focuses on them. You snap the shutter release and take the picture. Now, with back button focus and continuous mode, if you want to recompose, here we are. We focus on the eyes. We use our back button, press it with our thumb, and then we take our finger off, our thumb off. We recompose by moving the camera to the right, and now use our shutter release to take the picture. When the shutter release gets halfway down, it won't refocus the picture because it has nothing to do with focus anymore. It's all done by the back button. So as a street photographer with back button focus and continuous mode, you are set for anything. You're set for a still picture. If all of a sudden something comes up at you real fast and is running or moving, you're set to go for that too. Now, 5 scenarios. One of these 5 you will always encounter when taking a Candid. And it's good to be familiar with them. First, the subject will say no, refuse, or turn away. One of the most important things to learn for a successful street photographer is to be respectful. If the person doesn't want his picture taken or refuses, you don't take the picture. And that's why there's no examples of this. The subject will look at you and either smile or pose. It's human nature. You point a camera, they smile. They think they're doing you a favor. Usually this ruins the picture. Sometimes you just take it just to make them happy and go on, look for something else. But other times, this actually works, makes a pleasing picture. With these kids, it just happened to work. I would rather the butcher had not given me the thumbs up. This would have been an ideal candid with them yanking on the camel's tail of the freshly butchered camel. But that's what he did, and this is a candid, and in this case, it just happened to work. Again, you'll have people say, you should have had to move that thumb a little bit over so it didn't obscure the whole mouth. This is street photography. You get what you get. Here's a case where he lifted the camera and the kids posed, but in this case, in this alleyway with this group of kids, with the girls just so nice and reserved and the boys just mugging for the camera, I just thought this happened to work well. So this is a case where their posing did work. And these two brothers, which I love the texture in the back, I love the dress, and I have quite a few shots of them, and I have a fair amount where they are looking other places and they're in candids and not posing too. However, I think this showed their personality best, and I like this best out of the whole group. Here at an animal market, I lifted the camera up, and not only did the boy pose automatically, but he lifted up the goat and had the goat pose. It was like a twofer there as well. But in this picture, it happened to work. Okay, a lot of cases, it won't. It looks like a totally artificial picture, but in some, it makes a pleasing image, so you never know what you're going to get. When you lift the camera up, sometimes a subject will look at you, but it's actually a look, even though you're not telling the person what to do, that works. That look of the desert. I couldn't have posed it any better. These aren't even real faces, but looking right at me, again, it happened to work straight on. I couldn't have posed this any better. This man's expression, the hard look on his face, I can't even describe it, but this is not asking him to do that. This is just the look he gave me. This young man, this is on a boat on the Mekong, and he was looking out over the water, and I really liked the expression, and that's what I was going to try. I lifted up the camera. He sensed I was going to take a picture and looked at me. And looking at this picture afterwards, I actually liked the way this worked. I liked the expression on his face. So this is a case where, you know, you never know sometimes. When they look right at you, it can work. This shop owner, even with one good eye looking at me, happened to work. He's sitting on his anvil. I have multiple shots of this, a lot where he's looking straight ahead. But again, I happen to like the one where he's looking right at me. The subject will notice you, but continue what they were doing, and that's always ideal. Here, this young girl, a weaver, happened to see me. She looked up, stared right at me, and then went right back to doing what she was doing, allowing me to get this nice candid. This ceramic worker also, when he noticed me, looked at me to see what I was doing. But then if you just kind of hold your ground and see, a lot of times they go back to what they were doing, and you're able to get a nice candid. This was a case where I had very little room. I'm backed up against the wall in a narrow corridor. I wanted to get this shot, but as I was so close, we talked about that personal space. They both looked over at me. I thought I had lost the shot, but then they just went back to what they were doing again. So a lot of times if a person looks at you, you don't have to just run right away to, wait a second or two, and sometimes they will go back to what they were doing and you could grab a nice candid. It gets back again to one of my first slides, the thinking on your feet. And sometimes the subject will not notice or see the photographer. Using your lens, more of a telephoto, 200 millimeters, from a little bit down the street, and you can get some nice candids. Now, this is my plea to learn some photo editing. I am not talking about becoming a Photoshop guru, not by far, but there are certain things it helps to do. The camera has limitations. Dynamic range is usually the range between the lightest light and the darkest dark. The camera, because of its sensor, has a certain dynamic range. Our eye, though, has a much higher dynamic range, which is why when we get a picture out of the camera, we'll say, gee, you know, it looked much better when I saw it. The camera also is limited to 1 aperture per setting, per picture, I mean. That's the rule. Our eye has hundreds of aperture settings per picture. This is the classic case of looking at the person standing in a bright window. The person, when you take the picture, it'll come out with the person completely dark and the window all light, because you could either expose for one or the other. But when we say, gee, when we looked at that person, we never would have taken that picture. It looked perfect. That's because our eye, the pupil in our eye, which is our diaphragm, goes down and really constricts when we're looking at the person. And then when we look at the window behind him, the bright sunlight, I have it backwards. It'll dilate. It opens up when we look at the dark person, and it constricts when we look at the light in back of the person. But yet this is all happening hundreds of times a second. So when we look at the person standing in the window, everything seems perfectly exposed to us. Sensor dust, again, you could have the best camera and be technically the best photographer in the world. It's just a fact of life. You also have situational limitations. This is street photography and candids. You do not have control, as in the studio, of your background. The classic case of the flower coming out of the person's head or a pole coming out of their head too. You can't tell them move a little bit to the left, move a little bit to the right. That's it. So it helps if you have a way to remedy that situation. And I always say follow in the footsteps of Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams is my favorite photographer. I have just read everything he wrote, studied him, and I think he is just phenomenal. It is important to know that all of Ansel Adams' pictures, the ones you see of Yosemite and whatnot, none of them are straight out of the camera. None of them. They are all highly manipulated. He has maps of every photograph he's taken, darkroom maps that show where to dodge, where to burn, where to bleach, multiple other maneuvers as well. And when you look at the images that he's out of the camera images, they are, you would not even believe them. They are dull. It is also thought that Ansel Adams never cloned anything out of a picture, and that is basically true, but not entirely correct. In his picture, Winter Sunrise, and this is from his book, The Making of 40 Photographs, the enterprising youth of the Lone Pine High School had climbed the rocky slopes of the Alabama hills and whitewashed a huge LP for the world to see. It is a hideous and insulting scar on one of the great vistas of our land and shows in every photograph made of the area. I ruthlessly removed what I could of the LP from the negative and have always spotted out any remaining trace in the print. I have been criticized by some for doing this, but I am not enough of a purist to perpetuate the scar and thereby destroy, for me at least, the extraordinary beauty and perfection of the scene. Ansel Adams. If it was good enough for Ansel Adams, and remember, this is art, then I think it's fine for us. Some of the things with a little bit of photo editing that are easy to compensate for. Lighting. As a street photographer, you have no choice. This is not a camera setting problem. The camera settings are perfect. Everything exposed. This is the high midday sun right overhead. The face is in shadow. If you were able to use a studio light or a reflector, you could remedy that. But out on the street, you don't have it. So this is the best you can get with the camera. This is not a fault of your own. With a little bit, again, of work with post-processing, you are now able to get a pleasing picture, such as if you had a reflector there. And you could see a little bit of post-processing. If you don't want to post-process, that's fine, but then you don't really have the image. The classic case of the person in front of the bright window. Here, we saw this scene perfectly. We don't know why the camera captured it so poorly. The camera, again, if I had spot meted on the monk, then the background would have been blown out. The camera is able to only choose one aperture here. So again, this is the best the camera could do, no matter how expensive the camera. But in post-processing, if you're able to make it, to correct it a little, to lighten the shadows a little, to make this as you saw it with your eyes, again, that's how you saw the image. So post-processing is not to do some fancy thing and stick artificial things in the picture. It's to bring the image back to the way you saw it. And here, that's the best the camera could do under any circumstances. So you either don't have the image, or you could, with a little bit of post-processing, get a very pleasing image that was in your artistic image, and that's the way you thought of the picture. Cropping, rule of thirds, center versus off-center, square. If you do not have the ability to crop, such as in post-processing, you can have a nice picture, but you miss certain things. Here is a picture out of the camera of the blacksmith. Okay, it's fine, it's nice, but he's in the middle of the picture. With cropping, able to put him in the nice rule of thirds over to the left with the window on the right. It makes all the difference in the world. Cropping. The ability to square crop. Here, it works especially well when you have someone staring right into the camera. It centers that person. It's the right in your face, right in the middle there as well. So the cropping can sometimes make the picture. You have to have the ability in post-processing to do that. Here is an image right out of the camera. Again, I like the way this street sweeper worked, but you'll notice there's someone in the doorway there. I like the subtle, the low-key tones of some of the trash on the left side of the picture, but there's a little too much, especially that basin. If we do nothing more here other than crop, we can get an ideal picture out. So it also trains your eye to look at a picture and say, how could I improve this? And cropping is very much overlooked as a way to improve the picture. And to consider learning cloning, simple cloning, the ability to remove small unwanted objects is invaluable. Now, again, I am also going to whet your appetite with a little advanced cloning, but simple cloning is sometimes all you need. Why clone? We all remember the classic Kent State photograph. This was the cover of Life magazine. I show it because that's sometimes a street photographer what you get. The pole coming out of the head. Of course, in photojournalism, you don't touch anything, you don't clone. I am not sure of the origin of this photograph. I was told this was done by a student, not a professional photographer, and I have seen this photograph get retouched in other places or whatnot. But it just shows sometimes the need for cloning. Here in the pyramid, if you look at the top of the pyramid to the right, you'll see the big sensor dust. Actually, there are two of them. Once you see that sensor dust, that's all you see. If you don't have the ability, post-processing, to just get that bit of sensor dust out, then this picture basically is ruined. I mean, everyone's just going to see the sensor dust. All it takes is one click in post-processing. It's worth it to learn it. Now, I'm going to, this is where I whet your appetite a little again, this is the scene I showed before of the monks, but I am going to show you now the original. Now, the original, you see, you have to sometimes be able to see the picture within the picture. Here, I thought, gee, this would be an interesting picture if I could crop, center on the monks a little, and also get rid of some of those people that are close by the monks, the rocks and everything else. So again, with cropping and a little bit of cloning the people that were left in the picture, you get the picture on the right. This is, this is art. This is not photojournalism. If you're looking for a pleasing image, again, this is what you can get. As a street photographer, you have no control. I can't set this person up like in a studio. I can't move things. This is what it is. And you know where I'm going with this, and this is fine. You take this, and either this is what you have, but if you really, really want to work on this picture and learn a little cloning and get rid of some things as well, you could have an image that is very pleasing and what you are actually imagining this picture to be. You can see left and right, so with a little cropping and cloning. So again, this degree of cloning, of course, is a lot of cloning too, but it shows you sometimes how you could really just get a very, very pleasing artistic image out of something that you thought might not have been salvageable because you didn't have the ability to set up the shot. Special circumstances, children, parental permission, judgment. In this day and age, I wouldn't be hanging around a playground taking pictures of 4- and 5-year-olds. I put this up here just to, kids are not out of bounds. Of course, you've seen me have pictures of several kids there as well, but you always have to keep this in the back of your mind. Cultural sensitivity as a street photographer. Amish, some Orthodox religions, some indigenous peoples, be respectful. Now, this was at the Burton Tractor Festival. The Amish actually came to a secular area here to show off their tractors and whatnot, and it was a little different setting. Here, they really, for the most part, did not mind their pictures being taken and found it fine. This is not a picture that I would try down in Millersburg or whatnot. I think that would be just not respectful, but here, again, it worked. Some Orthodox religions, not for religious reasons, just because they just don't like it. I use more of a telephoto there. Street performers, consider a donation. And I feel strongly about this. Street performers are trying to make a buck out on the street. Basically, they have something you want, the picture. And so I think, again, I'm getting something in value from that. I'm getting the picture I want. And, so I give them a few bucks, and then I take the Candids. Something to consider. Police use caution and discretion, lift and shoot technique. Policemen in New York, this was a very calm scene, no problem taking this picture. These policemen were in Jerusalem. They are policemen. Lifted up to take the picture. As soon as I did and snapped the picture, they immediately put their hands up, no pictures, told me to move on. Lift and shoot, meaning if you're going to give it a try, knowing you're only going to have one shot. Knowing that ahead of time, make it count. Military, avoid if not in public areas in the United States, no military bases. And overseas, I would avoid all military under any circumstances except on display. At tombs or whatnot, you can get some interesting Candids again of military. These are Mongolian Special Forces. This was at a stadium, and this again shows the importance of the beanbag. I was a fair distance away using a 200 millimeter. I knew I'd have to crop the picture, but with the beanbag resting on the railing, really steadying the camera and the image stabilization, and if you have good technique, you're able to get it that even with a cropped picture, you could still keep it in excellent focus. Now, you've seen a number of pictures overseas and whatnot, and I don't want you to think by any chance that this is an endeavor that you need exotic places to go to. There is a ton in the Cleveland area, and I have tons of these pictures as well. Fairs and parades, county fairs, Geauga, Medina, Cuyahoga, St. Patrick's Day Parade, community events, Party in the Circle, Hessler Street Fair, flea markets, Feast of the Assumption, reenactments. Every year there's several Civil War reenactments in Ohio, Candid D-Day, and I highly recommend to anyone who wants to try their hand at street photography to go to the reenactments, because here you have that ideal case of a ton of really interesting people who actually want their picture taken. So they are, again, just all around, don't mind their picture being taken at all, and it's a great place to practice your street photography if you want to gain a little confidence. And these are, again, at some of the reenactments. You can set some stunning kind of just candids. Again, there's the look. You never know what you're going to get. This is a Candid D-Day. Again, great place for candids in town locally. Again, a great place to practice natural light photo. This is all just natural light, what you get. Some faces with character, an actual World War II vet at the Candid D-Day, wearing his old uniform. So again, a great place. Local events, Burton Steam Tractors, Burton Maple Syrup Festival, Cleveland Air Show. And again, the Burton Tractor Festival is a great place sometimes to get the Amish, where they are out in the secular community and a lot of times just don't mind their picture being taken. Some of the Amish kids. They will also, at the reenactments, a lot of times, and some of these events, have old blacksmiths. Again, a chance really to get some nice candids and practice. And this is an example of, you know, having what you have with the light, and also angle. Always think of a different angle. This is down on the knee to take this. Local streets, street vendors, street performers, West Side Market. This was at a bicycle rally or something. The traffic lights weren't being used. Instead, they were using this traffic man that I thought was interesting, and just got in the street and got that. This was in Chinatown at a Chinese checkers event. And finally, I like to end with safety, which is important as a street photographer. Always be aware of your surroundings. If possible, go with small groups of photographers. Now, obviously, if you're going to a reenactment or a street festival, you can go alone. But if you're going sometimes to the downtown streets or the flats or whatnot, it's something just to consider. Avoid sketchy or questionable areas, and the reason I say that is because sometimes photographers gravitate to sketchy and questionable areas because that's where the interesting pictures are. Everything is a risk-benefit, just something to consider. Avoid most protests. In this day and age, things could go south rather quickly. It is not as it used to be. I would leave this to the professionals, the photojournalists. I'm not talking about small protests. And, you know, there are a lot of smaller protests that are fine to go to, and local protests. But the big ones, such as we've recently had downtown, I would not risk it. And remember, you can be seen to be carrying expensive equipment right out there, and when you are concentrating on your subject, you're also less aware of your surroundings. For your man, your wallet should be in your front pocket. This is ideal for pickpockets. So again, just something to keep in mind. And that really rounds out the lecture, and I thank you for having me. And I know all of these things that I talked about in opportunities are unfortunately all of the events that are affected by the COVID-19 and are shut down. But they will be coming back, and we will be able to have all these again. So consider this, that when we're over all this, to try some of these events and give yourself a try at street photography, because when you do, get that final image where everything comes together. And now from this presentation, you see how many things have to come together in order to get that image. You will really appreciate it. Thank you.
I would like to thank Richard for your presentation. That was, man, that was very informative, a lot of good tips and a lot of great photos. One of the places I thought of, Richard, that you didn't mention that I've gone to is the Renaissance festivals. Those are always a lot of fun to shoot. So again, thank you, Richard. We appreciate your time and the presentation, and I would like to thank everybody that's tuned in to the Cleveland Photographic Society YouTube channel. Remember, keep shooting and stay safe. Oh, I'm sorry, there was one more slide. Again, if you'd like to view this presentation at another time, you can visit the CPS YouTube channel. The link is available on our CPS homepage, or simply visit the YouTube channel and search for Cleve Photographic. Also, you can send us your feedback, any questions or any suggestions. You can send your request to info@clevelandphoto.org. Again, thank you for viewing, and keep shooting and stay safe.